Welcome to Midnight Ember Studios.
The screen is dark, save for the flickering embers of a burning rose garden. 10 seconds, Nara. 10 seconds, Nari. Close your eyes and count with Zora. We open on Park Du-Wan standing in the ruins of his estate's greenhouse. His bespoke charcoal suit is torn, and blood drips from the jagged scar on his eyebrow. He isn't looking at the dozen armed men surrounding him. He is looking at Zora Montgomery, who was crouched behind a marble fountain, her deep bronze skin smudged with ash. She holds the 7-year-old twins close to her chest, her waist-length braids draped over them like a protective veil. 1, 2, the girls whisper in unison. Du-Wan turns to the gunman, his obsidian eyes devoid of mercy. "You made a mistake," he says, his voice like cracking ice. "You thought my daughters were my weakness. You didn't realize they are the only reason I haven't burned this entire city to the ground yet." As he raises his weapon, the scene fades to white, circling back to how the dragon was first tamed. The scent of bergamot and expensive tobacco always announced Park Do-Won before he even entered a room. At 9 a.m., that scent filled the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Park Montgomery Holdings, the legitimate face of a much darker empire. Do-Won stood at the head of the table, his charcoal gray suit fitting his swimmer's shoulders with clinical precision. He looked less like a man who ordered executions and more like an architect of empires. His obsidian eyes scanned the ledger presented by his lieutenants. "The Busan port is leaking," Do-Won said, his voice a low, dangerous silk. "Fix the leak or I'll replace the pipes. Permanently." Beside him, Zora Montgomery didn't blink. Her deep bronze skin was a striking contrast to the cold white marble of the office. She adjusted her gold minimalist watch, her waist-length braids shimmering as she leaned in to whisper, "Sir, the board meeting ends in 10 minutes. You have a 2 p.m. commitment that cannot be moved." The board assumed it was a high-stakes merger. Only Zora knew it was a second-grade parent-teacher conference for two 7-year-olds. By 3 p.m., the cultivated dragon was sitting in a chair designed for a toddler. "Mr. Park," the teacher said, glancing at Do-Won's sharp, high cheekbones and the faint, intimidating scar on his eyebrow, "Nara is assertive. She tried to restructure the playground hierarchy yesterday, and Nari is so quiet she's practically invisible, yet she seems to know everyone's secrets." Do-Won felt a rare tug of a smirk. "They take after their mother's spirit," he lied smoothly. In reality, they took after him, the ruler and the spy. He exited the school to find Zora waiting by the black sedan. She handed him a lukewarm juice box and a folder of assassination threats with the same steady grace. "Happy birthday to the girls, Do-Won." He used his name only because the windows were rolled up. "The cake is at the penthouse. The security team has swept the perimeter 3 times." Do-Won looked at the juice box, then at the woman who had kept his life from splintering for 7 years. "Did you get the lilies, Zora?" he asked. "I did," she replied, her eyes softening, "and the toy kingdom Nara asked for. But you know what they really want for their 7th birthday, don't you?" Do-Won stared out at the rain-slicked streets of Seoul. "They want a father who doesn't smell like gunpowder." "They want you," Zora corrected firmly. As the car pulled into the underground garage of his high-rise fortress, Do-Won buttoned his blazer, hiding the holster beneath his ribs. For the next 4 hours, the Mafia boss was dead. Only the father remained. He didn't know that upstairs, a gift was waiting that would ensure the boss had to return with a vengeance. The penthouse was silent, save for the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Nara and Nari had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from a birthday spent chasing their dragon father through the halls. Do-Won had retreated to his glass-walled study, but Zora Montgomery remained in the kitchen, the glow of her tablet reflecting in her dark, observant eyes. Zora didn't just manage Do-won's schedule, she managed his survival. As his primary secretary, she moved the money that moved the world. But tonight, as she ran the end-of-quarter reconciliation for the Park Montgomery holdings, a cold knot formed in her stomach. There was a ghost in the ledger. It was a small discrepancy, a series of microtransactions routed through a shell company in Cyprus. To any other accountant, it would look like a rounding error. To Zora, it looked like a map. She traced the digital trail, her fingers flying across the screen. The funds weren't being stolen, they were being used to pay for information services. Specifically, someone was buying GPS coordinates, building blueprints, and historical records of property deeds. Her breath hitched. The coordinates weren't for the Busan docks or the Seoul headquarters. They were for the private off-grid villa in Jeju where the twins spent their summers. "Do-won," she whispered into the empty room. She stood abruptly, her silk trousers rustling. She didn't knock when she entered his study. In the world of the syndicate, doors were for people who followed rules. Zora and Do-won followed only each other. Do-won was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of neat whiskey in his hand. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian, the city lights of Seoul shimmering behind him like a fallen galaxy. He didn't turn around when she entered. He didn't need to. He knew the cadence of her step by heart. "The girls are asleep?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "They are," Zora said, walking to his desk and turning the tablet toward him. "But your empire is awake, Do-won, and it's hungry." He turned then, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the data she had highlighted in red. The cultivated mask slipped for a split second, replaced by the predatory stillness of the dragon. He saw what she saw, the blueprint for the Jeju villa. "Who?" he asked. The single word carried the weight of a death sentence. "The signature on the Cyprus account belongs to an old alias used by the New Breed faction," Zora explained, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "But the authorization came from inside your inner circle, someone with level 5 clearance." Do-won set his glass down on the marble desk with a sharp clack. "My lieutenants believe I have grown soft because I spend my Saturday afternoons at a piano recital instead of a gambling den. Kinka." "They're not just looking for a liability, Do-won," Zora said, stepping closer. The scent of her vanilla and sandalwood perfume cut through the heavy aroma of his tobacco. "They know you'll give up the throne if they hold a knife to Nari or Nara's throat." "And you?" Do-won asked, his gaze locking onto hers. "They know you're the one who moves the money. They know you're the one who keeps the dragon's heart beating." "Let them come," Zora said, her chin tilting upward, her braids swaying with the movement. "I didn't leave America and spend 7 years building this kingdom with you just to watch a few disgruntled soldiers tear it down." Do-won reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he pulled back, the professional wall snapping back into place. "Double the security, scrub the Jeju records, and Zora, yes, check the birthday gifts one more time, especially the ones delivered to the office." Zora nodded, but as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a notification from the penthouse's front door camera. Her heart skipped. A courier in a black uniform was standing at the service entrance, holding a large rectangular box wrapped in silver paper. The timestamp was 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the twins' birthday ended. "Do-won," she said, her voice dropping to a sharp warning. "It's here." The box was unnervingly heavy. Zora met the courier at the service entrance, her hand resting discreetly on the small of her back where a subcompact semi-automatic was holstered beneath her silk blazer. The courier didn't linger. He didn't even ask for a signature. He simply disappeared into the shadows of the service elevator, leaving the silver-wrapped package sitting on the cold granite floor. Do-won appeared behind her, his presence a silent, cooling pressure. He didn't speak as he used a ceramic pocket knife to slit the silver paper. When the wrapping fell away, both of them went rigid. It was a dollhouse. But it wasn't a generic Victorian manor or a plastic pink castle. It was a perfect 1:24 scale architectural replica of their penthouse. The dark marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the specific placement of the piano in the corner, every detail was exact. "This isn't a gift," Zora whispered, her throat tightening. "It's a target map." Do-won knelt, his sharp eyes scanning the miniature rooms. With a steady hand, he reached into the tiny replica of the twins' bedroom. He pulled out 2 small figurines. They were hand-carved from wood, painted to look exactly like Nari and Nara in their birthday pinafores. But the figurines weren't standing. They were lying face down on the miniature beds. In the miniature study, the very room they were standing near, there was a third figure. It was a woman with deep bronze skin and braids, sitting at a desk. A tiny red-painted dot was centered perfectly on her forehead. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Do-won's obsidian eyes turned toward the real Zora. The jagged scar on his eyebrow twitched, a rare, violent tell. He didn't look at the threat against himself. He looked at the red dot on the miniature Zora. "They aren't just watching us," Do-won said, his voice dropping into a register that made the glass on the table vibrate. "They are inside the perimeter." Suddenly, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The sprawling galaxy of Seoul's skyline vanished as the backup jammers kicked in, cutting the cellular and Wi-Fi signals. Total silence descended, save for the faint rhythmic thud of a heavy-lift drone hovering somewhere near the balcony. "Zora," Do-won commanded, his voice a lethal snap. "The girls, now." Zora didn't hesitate. She kicked off her heels, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a woman who had been trained by the best killers in the East. She sprinted toward the twins' room, her braids flying behind her like a dark banner. Inside, the room was bathed in the ghostly blue light of the moon. Nari and Nara were huddled together, their eyes wide. They were 7, old enough to know that when the lights went out and Auntie Zora looked like a soldier, the game of hide-and-seek was over. "Under the bed, babies, now, just like we practiced," Zora whispered, her voice a calm, unbreakable anchor. She didn't wait for them to move. She guided them into the reinforced crawl space hidden beneath the floorboards. Back in the foyer, Do-won was a shadow among shadows. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt glowing faintly in the dark. He held a custom-weighted suppressed pistol in a relaxed grip. The glass of the balcony shattered, a clean, calculated entry. 2 men in tactical gear swung inside, their boots crunching on the expensive marble. They didn't see the boss, they saw the dragon. Do-won moved with a cultivated violence. No wasted motion, no hesitation. 2 muffled thuds echoed in the room. The men dropped before they could even level their sights. Zora emerged from the hallway, her own weapon drawn. She scanned the balcony. That was just the probe. The main force will be at the elevators. Do-won, step over the bodies, his eyes locking onto Zora's. In the darkness, the professional wall between them didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He reached out, his thumb grazing the spot on her forehead where the red dot had been in the dollhouse. "They touched what is mine," he growled. "They tried," Zora corrected, her hand covering his for a brief second. "But the foundation doesn't break, Do-won, and the garden is still standing." "Not for long," he replied, looking at the dollhouse. "If they have the blueprints to this floor, they have the override codes for the panic room. We can't stay here. We're being flushed out." "Then we go to the streets," Zora said, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective light. "Your world, boss. My rules." Do-won nodded once. The secret was out. The girls were no longer safe in the cage. It was time to show the new breed why the dragon ruled the streets with iron. The descent from the penthouse was not a flight, it was a tactical withdrawal. While Do-won cleared the stairwell, Zora became the physical center of the twins' world. She had Nari and Nara tucked into the alcove of her arms, moving them through the service corridors with a rhythmic pace that kept their panic at bay. "Is this the adventure part, Zora?" Nara whispered, her voice trembling, but her father's mischievous fire still flickering in her eyes. "This is the part where we outrun the shadows," Zora replied, her voice a soothing, low-frequency hum. "Keep your eyes on my braids. Follow the gold beads. Don't look at the walls." They reached the sub-basement garage, a concrete cavern filled with the hum of high-end machinery. The air smelled of gasoline and cold dampness. Waiting in the shadows was a nondescript armored SUV, not one of Do-won's flashy executive sedans, but a vehicle designed to take a hit and keep rolling. "Get in, low on the floor," Do-won commanded. He didn't look back as he climbed into the driver's seat. Zora slid into the passenger side, her tablet already open, bypassing the local jamming signals using a hardened satellite uplink. "The elevators are being held on the 42nd floor," Zora reported, her fingers dancing across the screen. "Do-won, 3 black vans just broke the perimeter at the south gate." "Let them follow," Do-won said, the engine roaring to life with a primal growl. "I want them out of the residential sector. I want them where the streets have no witnesses." As they roared out of the garage, the hunt began. The rain had started again, turning Seoul into a neon-streaked blur of charcoal and violet. Behind them, the headlights of the 3 vans appeared like the eyes of predatory insects. The chase tore through the narrow alleys of the Mapo district. Do-won drove with a terrifying surgical precision, threading the heavy SUV through gaps that seemed impossible. Every time a van tried to pull alongside, he would tap the brakes or swerve with a cultivated aggression that sent the attackers veering into parked cars or trash heaps. "Left on the next 3 blocks," Zora directed, her eyes fixed on a thermal map of the city's traffic. "There's a construction bottleneck. If we hit it at 80, they'll get trapped behind the barriers." "Hold on," Do-won warned. The SUV bucked as he hit the curb, bypassing a line of orange cones. The first van tried to follow and slammed into a concrete pylon, flipping in a spectacular shower of sparks. But the remaining 2 were relentless. A window rolled down on the lead van, and the rhythmic spat, spat, spat of submachine gun fire peppered the rear glass of the SUV. The twins shrieked. "Auntie Zora!" Nari cried, clutching at Zora's seat. Zora didn't flinch. She reached back, her hand finding Nari's small, cold fingers and squeezing. "I've got you, Nari. The glass is strong. It's stronger than the bad men. Count to 10 with me." 1, 2, the girls started, their voices thin against the roar of the engine. Zora looked at Do-won. His face was a mask of granite, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He wasn't just driving, he was calculating. He saw the way Zora held the girls together with nothing but her voice and her presence. She was the shield, the bronze armor that protected his soul while he wielded the sword. "They're trying to pit us towards the Han River," Zora noted, her voice dropping into a sharp tactical register. "They want us on the bridge where we have nowhere to turn." "Then we give them the bridge," Do-won said, a dark, lethal smile touching his lips. "Zora, prepare the cleaner protocol. If we're going into the water, I want the trail to go cold the moment we hit the surface." "Understood," Zora replied, her thumb hovering over a red icon on her tablet. They surged onto the bridge, the rain-slicked asphalt reflecting the flashing lights of their pursuers. The vans were closing in, boxing them towards the railing. Do-won looked in the rearview mirror, his obsidian eyes meeting the terrified, trusting gazes of his daughters. "Choke your eyes, my lilies. The dragon is going to fly." With a violent jerk of the wheel, Do-won didn't steer away from the railing, he steered directly into it. The armored SUV smashed through the barrier, suspended for a heartbeat in the gray Seoul mist, before plunging towards the dark, swirling depths of the river below. The silence of the safe house was a physical weight. Located beneath an abandoned textile warehouse on the outskirts of Incheon, the bunker was a masterpiece of quiet luxury turned into a tactical fortress. Here, the air was filtered, the walls were lead-lined, and the only sound was the low hum of the server racks. Do-won stood by a steel table, stripping his soaked white shirt. His back was a map of his history, scars from blade and bullet that he usually kept hidden beneath bespoke charcoal wool. He didn't turn when he heard the soft clack of Zora's heels on the polished concrete. Zora had changed the twins into oversized hoodies and thick socks, tucking them into the bunk beds in the back room. Now she stood in the doorway, her braids damp and her bronze skin shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights. She carried a first aid kit. "They're asleep," she said, her voice echoing in the sterile room. Nara asked if the SUV was a submarine. Nari just wanted to know if you were hurt. Doan finally turned. His obsidian eyes were weary, the cultivated mask hanging by a thread. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them their father is a man who doesn't know how to lose," Zora replied. She walked toward him, setting the kid on the table. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched a fresh graze on his shoulder where a shard of glass had sliced through. "And I told them I wouldn't let anything happen to them, or to you." Doan grabbed her wrist, not with violence, but with a desperate grounding pressure. "Why, Zora? You could have stayed in New York. You could have been a CFO at a Fortune 500. You didn't sign up to jump off bridges with a Korean crime lord." Zora didn't pull away. She stepped into his space, the scent of rain and vanilla filling the narrow gap between them. "I didn't sign up for the crime lord, Doan. I signed up for the man who spent 3 hours researching the best pediatricians in Seoul while his lieutenants were planning a heist. I signed up for the man who looks at his daughters like they're the only things in this world that aren't broken." "I am the one who breaks things, Zora," he growled, his thumb tracing the pulse in her wrist. "That is my function." "Then let me be the one who holds them together," she countered, her voice dropping to a whisper. The professional wall that had stood for 7 years didn't just crack, it dissolved. Doan pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted of salt and iron. It was a collision of two worlds, the cold, calculated architect and the unshakable foundation. For a moment, there was no syndicate, no new breed, and no blood-stained ledger. There was only the heat of her skin and the frantic beat of his heart. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. "If we do this," he whispered, "there is no going back. You won't just be my secretary. You will be the queen of a kingdom at war." "I've been running your kingdom for 7 years, Doan," Zora said, a small, fierce smile touching her lips as she reached up to trace the jagged scar on his eyebrow. "And I think it's time we made the contract official." A soft thud from the back room broke the spell. They broke apart instantly, weapons half drawn by instinct, only to see Nara standing in the doorway, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Her dark eyes, so like her father's, darted between them. "Appa, is Zora going to stay with us forever now, not just for work?" Doan looked at Zora, then knelt to Nara's level. For the first time, he didn't try to curate the truth. He didn't try to hide the scars. "Yes, Nara," he said, his voice thick with a new kind of resolve. "Zora is the heart of this garden, and we don't let the heart go." As he pulled Nara into an embrace, he looked up at Zora. The unspoken contract was signed. They were no longer a boss and a secretary. They were a family. But as Zora's tablet chimed with a high-priority alert, they both knew the new breed wouldn't let them enjoy the peace for long. The Judas in their circle had just sent a message. The bunker's air conditioning hummed a low metallic tune as the quiet luxury of their isolation began to grate against the reality of their survival. Doan was hunched over a tactical map of the city, his fingers tracing the routes he had once controlled with a single word. Now, those same streets felt like a labyrinth designed for his execution. Zora sat at the secondary terminal, her braids pulled into a tight, functional knot. The Judas message she had received was a single image, a digital photograph of the safe house's ventilation intake from the surface. "They found us," Zora said, her voice devoid of panic, sharpened into a tool. "They're not moving in yet. They're waiting for the dragon to starve." "They don't know the dragon has lilies," Doan replied, his obsidian eyes fixed on the security monitors. In the corner of the room, Nari and Nara were not playing. They had gathered the emergency supplies Zora had laid out: thermal blankets, dehydrated rations, and a specialized first aid kit. At 7 years old, most children were learning to ride bikes. Doan's daughters were currently sorting ammunition by caliber. "This one is for the small gun, right, Auntie Zora?" Nara asked, holding up a 9mm round with the clinical curiosity of a scientist. Doan winced, a flicker of pain crossing his high cheekbones. "Nara, put that down." "Why?" Nara asked, her chin tilting in that defiant way that mirrored her father's own stubbornness. "If the bad men come into the garden, we have to help. You told us a kingdom only stands if everyone guards the gate." Nari, the observer, looked up from her task of folding a mylar blanket. "We heard you and Zora in the kitchen. We know there's a leak. A leak means a hole, and a hole means the house can fall down." Dowan looked at Zora, a silent plea in his eyes to keep them innocent for just a little longer. But Zora shook her head slowly. "They're your daughters, Dowan. They've been breathing your air for 7 years. You can't lie to them about the scent of smoke when the house is already on fire." Zora knelt beside the girls, her bronze skin glowing under the bunker's LED strips. "Listen to me. We're going to play a game called the Invisible Path. Your father and I are going to clear the way. Your job is to be the shadows. You move when I move. You stop when I stop. If you hear a loud noise, it's just the dragon roaring. Do you understand?" Nari nodded, her softer features hardening into a terrifyingly familiar resolve. She reached into her pinafore pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of glass she had scavenged from the SUV's wreckage. "I'll sting them if they get close to Zora," Nari whispered. The test had begun. Dowan realized then that he hadn't just begotten children, he had begotten heirs to a throne he was trying to burn. They weren't afraid of the new breed, they were insulted by them. "The ventilation shaft is the only way out without triggering the external sensors," Zora said, turning back to the map. "It leads to the old textile vats. From there, it's a 2-mile hike to the Incheon docks." "They'll be expecting a tactical breakout," Dowan mused, his mind clicking into place. "They won't expect the boss to be crawling through a vent with 2 7-year-olds and a secretary." "I am not just a secretary anymore, Dowan," Zora reminded him, her hand resting on the grip of her suppressed pistol. "No," he agreed, his voice softening as he looked at the 3 women, the Foundation, the Kingdom, and the Lily, who now defined his entire existence. "You are the reason I'm going to survive this night." As the sound of a heavy drill began to vibrate through the bunker ceiling, Dowan hoisted Nara onto his shoulders and gave Nari a silent nod. The invisible path beckoned. They entered the vents just as the first canister of tear gas shattered against the bunker's reinforced door. The textile vats smelled of vinegar and ancient rotted silk. The air was thick, pressing against their lungs as they emerged from the ventilation shaft into the rusted skeleton of the warehouse. Outside, the Incheon rain hammered against the corrugated tin roof, a rhythmic roar that masked their movement. "Stay in the shadows," Dowan whispered, his hand a steadying weight on Nari's shoulder. Zora led the way, her tablet dimmed to the lowest setting. She was tracking the Judas signal, the encrypted ping that had led the new breed to their bunker. As they navigated the maze of rusted machinery, a flickering light appeared in the foreman's office overlooking the floor. Standing in the center of that light was Kang Min-ho, Dowan's second-in-command. He was a man Dowan had raised from the gutters, a man who had sat at the Park family table and eaten the girl's birthday cake only hours ago. Min-ho was currently on a satellite phone, his face twisted in an expression of bored cruelty. "The gas is in," Min-ho said into the receiver. "Check the bodies. If the girls are alive, bring them to me. If the woman resists, end it. Dowan is the only one who needs to see the end of his empire before he dies." Dowan felt a cold, sharp blade of betrayal twist in his chest. He moved to step forward, but Zora's hand caught his arm. Her eyes were like flint. She didn't look hurt. She looked like she was calculating the most efficient way to dismantle a traitor. "The girls," she mouthed. Dowan looked back. Nari and Nara were huddled behind a vat, their eyes wide as they watched the man they called Uncle Min-ho discuss their deaths. Nara's small hands were balled into fists. Nari was eerily still, her observer gaze fixed on Min-ho with a chilling intensity. "Zora, take them to the perimeter," Dowan commanded in a breath so low it barely stirred the dust. "This is a cultivated debt. I have to settle it." "No," whispered Zora. "He's not alone. Look at the catwalks." 4 silhouettes shifted in the rafters. Snipers. Min-ho hadn't just brought soldiers, he had brought an execution squad. If Dowan stepped out, he'd be ventilated before he reached the stairs. Zora reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a small, palm-sized device, a high-frequency acoustic jammer she'd designed for corporate espionage. She's going to scramble their comms and the lights. You have 30 seconds of darkness. Nara, Nari, when the lights go out, you run to the blue door at the far end. Do not stop. Do not look at the dragon. 1, 2, Nari started the count, her voice a boast of a promise. 3, Zora snapped, and she jammed the device. The warehouse plunged into absolute suffocating blackness. A high-pitched whine erupted through the sniper's earpieces, causing them to cry out in agony. Dowon moved. He didn't run, he flowed. He was the cultivated dragon unleashed, a creature of the dark who knew every inch of his territory. By the time the first sniper managed to blink away the spots in his eyes, Dowon was already on the catwalk. 2 silent thuds followed. In the office below, Minho scrambled for his weapon, but a different shadow met him. Zora had bypassed the floor entirely, swinging over a railing to land with a lethal grace in the center of the room. She didn't use a gun. She used the heavy, steel-cased tabret that held the evidence of his treason. The blow caught Minho across the jaw, sending him sprawling into the glass window. The glass shattered, raining down on the warehouse floor like diamonds. Dowon descended from the rafters, landing in the office ruins like a dark god. He stood over Minho, the jagged scar on his eyebrow pulsing. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. I gave you a seat at my table, Minho. I gave you a path, but you chose to dig a grave. You went soft, Minho wheezed, blood leaking from his mouth. For a secretary? For 2 brats. You're a king who wants to be a gardener. I am a gardener, Dowon corrected, leaning down so his obsidian eyes were inches from the traitor's. And every gardener knows that when a weed threatens the lilies, you pull it out by the root. Outside, the blue door creaked open. The twins had made it. Zora stood by the shattered window, her weapon leveled at the remaining entrance. The new breed is coming, Dowon, Zora warned. Minho was just the gardener's help. The masters are at the gate. Dowon didn't look back as he left Minho in the dark. He walked toward Zora, taking her hand in a grip that was no longer professional. Then let's show them what happens when the dragon burns the gate. The final line of defense wasn't a fortress. It was an abandoned shipyard on the Incheon waterfront, a ghost of rusted cranes and skeletal hulls. The rain had turned to a fine mist that clung to Zora's braids as she fortified their position inside a hollowed-out dry dock. She had the twins huddled in the deepest corner, shielded by steel bulkheads that had once braved the Yellow Sea. Dowon stood near the entrance, a silhouette among the industrial shadows. He had discarded his torn white shirt, his scarred back exposed to the cold, damp air. He held 2 modified, full-auto pistols, their heavy silencers giving them an unbalanced, lethal look. Zora, he said, not turning, his voice dropping below the register of the rain. If they breach the main line, you take the emergency skiff under Hull 7. You don't wait for me, you don't count. Zora stepped away from the twins, her bronze skin reflecting the distant orange glow of the city. We're not waiting, Dowon, she whispered, her hand moving to the small of her back where her weapon was holstered. We're anchoring. We aren't a secret anymore. They are attacking us, and my contract says I protect the assets, and these girls are the only asset that matters. A soft click echoed through the shipyard, the sound of a magnetic lock being bypassed. The new breed had arrived. They didn't come with silence or stealth. They came with a flood of light. 3 industrial spotlights snapped on from the surrounding cranes, blinding Dowon and Zora. Show us the dragon who turned into a worm, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. It was Minho's replacement, a younger, hungrier lieutenant who didn't respect the old codes. 1, 2, a tiny whisper drifted from the dry dock's corner. Nari was starting the count. Nara didn't join in this time. She was watching her father, her obsidian eyes fixed on his broad, scarred back. Dowon stepped out into the blinding light. He raised his weapons, but not at the figures emerging from the mist. He fired a single, calculated burst at the base of the nearest crane. The spotlight didn't just shatter, the entire structure groaned as a critical support beam was sheared. The massive crane collapsed, crushing the lead vehicle of the new breed and sending the voice over the loudspeaker into a static scream. "Go to the shadows, my lilies!" Dowan roared, and the chaos began. The dry dock erupted in gunfire. It was a cultivated massacre. Dowan moved not with rage, but with a terrifying stillness. He used the rusted environment as his weapon, leading the attackers into crossfires of his own making, collapsing scaffoldings on advancing squads. He wasn't just fighting, he was curating a battlefield. But the new breed was relentless. A squad managed to flank him, circling towards the dry dock's entrance where Zora stood guard. "Zora, front!" Dowan shouted, but he was pinned down by suppressing fire. Zora didn't panic, she didn't scream. She stepped out into the rain, drawing her weapon with the practiced grace of a woman who managed the most complex hostile takeovers in the financial world. She didn't fire in bursts, she took single, measured shots. The bronze shield wasn't passive, it was lethal. 2 men dropped before they realized the secretary was the real threat, but a third managed to wrestle her to the ground, his hand finding her throat. Her weapon skittered across the wet concrete. "Auntie Zora!" Nara shrieked. Nari didn't scream, she moved. She slipped out from behind the bulkhead, small and invisible in the shadows. As the man pressed his weight on Zora, Nari lunged forward and jammed the jagged shard of glass she had saved from the SUV into his calf. The man howled, jerking back. That was all the space Zora needed. She grabbed a loose length of chain from the floor and wrapped it around his throat, using her body weight as a lever. It was a brutal, pragmatic move, far removed from quiet luxury, but it was necessary. Dowan arrived a second later, having dispatched the pinning squad. He stood over Zora and Nari, his breathing heavy, his chest streaked with rain and grime. He looked at Nari, clutching the glass shard, and Nara watching from the dry dock entrance. The mask of the cultivated dragon was entirely gone. In its place was a man who saw that his garden didn't need a wall, it needed to grow thorns. "We go to the skiff," Dowan commanded, pulling Zora and Nari to their feet. "The new breed is dead. The old kingdom is gone. It's time to build a new one." As they reached the edge of the harbor, the twins watched the shipyard, now a ruin of twisted steel and smoke, fade into the mist. They hadn't just survived the night, they had claimed their heritage. The secret was over. The family had begun. The morning sun rose over the Jeju coastline, not with the harsh glare of the city, but with a soft golden clarity that turned the yellow sea into a sheet of hammered silk. In the center of a sprawling cliff-top estate, far from the blood-slicked alleys of Seoul, Park Do-won stood in his new garden. He was dressed in a simple linen shirt, the top buttons undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the scars that were no longer secrets. He held a pair of pruning shears, carefully tending a row of white lilies. He looked like exactly what his name implied, a man
Please like, subscribe, and comment.
on a cultivated path. A rhythmic thud, thud, thud of footsteps echoed on the stone walkway. 10 seconds, Appa! You have to count to 10! Dowan closed his eyes, a genuine smile softening the sharp angles of his face. 1, he began, his voice no longer a blade of ice, but a low hum of contentment. 2, 3. By the time he reached 7, he felt the familiar, grounding presence of Zora Montgomery behind him. She wasn't carrying a tactical tablet or a suppressed pistol today. She wore a flowy, cream-colored sundress that complemented the rich bronze of her skin, her braids adorned with small gold rings that caught the light. In her hand was a tray of tea and 2 glasses of juice. "They're hiding in the hydrangea bushes," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Nara thinks she's invisible, but Nari is actually tracking your shadow." Dowan turned, pulling Zora into the circle of his arm. The unspoken contract had been replaced by a life of loud, vibrant noise. "Let them stay hidden a little longer," he said. "In this garden, the shadows are safe." The new breed was a memory, their names erased from the ledgers of the underworld. Do-won had dismantled the Iron Syndicate, transforming its vast resources into a legitimate global conglomerate managed by Zora. He was no longer the Don, he was the chairman of a legacy that his daughters could actually inherit without staining their hands. The board meeting is at noon, Zora reminded him, though there was no urgency in her voice. The merger with the clean energy firm is ready for your signature. The board can wait, Do-won replied, looking at the two small heads popping up from the bushes. I have a more important appointment. Nari wants to show me her new violin piece, and Nara wants to restructure the koi pond. Nari and Nara ran toward them, their matching pinafores bright against the green lawn. They didn't look like the terrified children from the shipyard. They looked like the lily and the kingdom they were born to be. As Do-won swept both girls into his arms, he looked at Zora. The circular journey was complete. He had started as a man who ruled with iron to protect a secret, only to find that the truth was the only thing that could set his family free. He had fought a battle between duty and love, and in the end, the choice had been easy. 8, 9, the twins chimed, hugging his neck. 10, Do-won finished, kissing their foreheads. Ready or not, here we are. The dragon was gone. The father had arrived, and in the garden they had built together, the peace was finally, beautifully, permanent.